Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us bright and early this morning for our Wake Up with Research breakfast. So I'm Daryl DeWald. I'm the Vice President of Health Sciences for WSU, and I'm the Chancellor of WSU Spokane campus. So this is the third part of the Wake Up with Research series. Our goal with these events is to provide a backdrop for all of you to learn more about the research that is happening not only in our community, but right here on the Spokane campus. We've received great feedback from our previous topics. If you remember last month, we touched on COVID-19 and vulnerable populations. And prior to that in January, we heard about the COVID-19 research happening across the entire WSU system. I think you're going to find today's topics really engaging in learning more about how researchers are giving life to science by growing companies and impacting healthcare. It is exciting for all of us to share our scientific leaders with you in this type of a forum. Our researchers are making important contributions in the fields of sleep and performance, addictions, autism, cancer, aging, chronic disease, neuroscience. Well, as I've said before, the list goes on. And what is so great about all of this is that they are discovering and working through complex and life-changing problems that will ultimately enrich the quality of life for all of us. So we'd like to acknowledge our sponsor today. Perkins Coie is a leading international law firm that provides a full array of corporate, commercial, litigation, intellectual property, and regulatory legal advice to a broad range of clients, including many of the world's most innovative companies and industry leaders, as well as public and not-for-profit organizations. Perkins Coie is frequently recognized for its leadership in the legal profession. We want to thank them for the support for today's breakfast. And at this time, what I'd like to do is turn it over to my great colleague, Celestina Barbosa-Leiker, who serves as the Vice Chancellor of Research for WSU Health Sciences. But before I do that, let me just say that Celestina is not only an associate professor in nursing, she is a leader in research. So she's an active researcher. So she brings not only an understanding of the topics that we're discussing, but she leads in many areas. So Celestina, with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Daryl. Good morning, everyone. And thank you all for waking up with research for us again for our third Wake Up for Research of this year. As Daryl said, our other two focused on COVID-19. We talked about the research going on throughout the entire WSU system. And then last month, we had a focus on COVID-19 with already vulnerable populations. So it's great to be back with all of you here today, this morning. My goal for all of us this morning is to get a better understanding of the research going on, not only across the entire WSU system, but also here in Spokane. So today we're going to hear from true innovators, and they have taken their research and turned it into growing companies. And it's with these companies that their mission is also to improve healthcare for all various groups. Before I introduce our speakers today, I want to talk about our land-grant university. So Washington State University is a land-grant university, which means that we are here to serve every resident in the state of Washington. For WSU Health Sciences Spokane, how we envision our land-grant mission is not only by educating the next generation of nurses, physicians, and pharmacists that will serve the health of those here in our state of Washington, but also through our researchers. Our research is here to help improve the health and well-being of every resident in the state of Washington and beyond. That is our land-grant mission, and that is how we fulfill our mission here on the Health Sciences campus. We are partnering with all of you for better health, and we're really thrilled to be here with you this morning. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelists today. They're going to share an overview of their related areas of research and their companies. So we're going to begin with Drs. Glenn Prestwich and Michelle Armstrong. Glenn is the director of SP3 Northwest, and he's also a President's Distinguished Professor at WSU Health Sciences Spokane. And Glenn is joined by Michelle Armstrong, the Assistant Director at SP3 Northwest. Glenn and Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great privilege to be able to tell you about SP3 Northwest, a life science incubator right here in Spokane and spreading throughout the state, as we'll describe in a few minutes. Dr. Armstrong and I will describe some of the aspects of SP3 Northwest, and then we will turn it over to some of our startup companies to describe what they are doing and how they are going to improve people's lives. Next slide, please, Kevin. Why do we call it SP3 Northwest? Everybody says, why don't you call it an accelerator? Well, SP3 is the cornerstone of life. From the pharmacy to the farmer's market, tetrahedral SP3 carbons are everywhere and they're essential to life. So it was natural for me, an organic chemist, to come up with SP3 Northwest as a name for our incubator. Next slide, Kevin. In fact, SP3 Northwest's vision is to give life to science. And our goal as the spin-out space in Spokane, just therefore SP, 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 or SP3, our goal for SP3 Northwest is to launch investable life science companies from WSU technologies, but also from community innovations. And we will highlight some of those as we go along. Importantly, although we started as a spin-out space in Spokane, we are already expanding throughout the Washington state system. Next slide, Kevin. In fact, we already have started the SP3 Northwest at the incubator at the Pullman campus. We are in discussions with Everett and Vancouver already, and soon also Tri-Cities, so that SP3 Northwest will actually be a network of nodes where the nodes are centered in the communities where WSU has a campus across the state. That really allows us to bring the community into this equation, not just the universities. So I'm going to say a few more words and then I'll turn it over to Michelle for a few minutes. Let me just summarize that we started, as I just said, as a life science incubator here in Spokane's University District. We embrace the bench to business and business to product paradigm. You can't just take things from the lab bench and turn them into products. You have to go through a business. And so our role as SP3 Northwest is to help student and faculty entrepreneurs working with community business partners to create companies that can then get products out the door. What our goal, therefore, is to unite the academics, the business people, the innovators, the investors, and the experts to bring together really, truly investable, innovative companies that have a chance of being successful in the marketplace. And we want to deploy solutions to critical healthcare problems that will improve people's lives. Not only that, to do this, we are, as SP3 Northwest, also working with community developers to spearhead regional workforce development. If we're going to create an innovative ecosystem, you need an educated workforce and a workforce that's customized for the industry that you're trying to develop. For example, biopharmaceutical manufacturing, such as that which has been very important in creating COVID-19 vaccines. Not only are we expanding throughout the state of Washington, as I showed in the last slide, but we are also connecting West and East Washington with North Idaho and Montana through other initiatives that SP3 Northwest has already had with Montech in Missoula, Montana, with Boise, and with North Idaho College in Coeur d'Alene. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Armstrong, who will tell us a little bit about our value proposition and then start going through some of SP3 Northwest's specific team and offerings. Michelle?
Thank you so much, Glenn. It's exciting to be here with you and everyone for Wake Up with Research. So how we accomplish what Glenn was talking about is to work with the companies that are spinning out either of the community or Washington State University, have a conversation, find out where they are in their growth and what we can offer them. Sometimes that looks like lab space. Sometimes it looks like B2B partners to help them manufacture and develop their products. We have a service partner directory that I'll go into in more depth in just a couple minutes, along with a mentor network that can help guide and shape how they go forward with their next steps. For entrepreneurs, we offer assistance with SBIR and STTR grant preparation, and we also advise on how to make the most of their IP and who to partner with to make sure that they're covered legally. And then one of the great things we're able to do is help them with incorporation, logo design, and website development. Next slide. So these are some of the companies that we're currently working with, and I'd love to introduce you to just a few. Crimson Medical Solutions is a WSU student startup that is reducing medication errors through developing an organizer and labeling device for intravenous lines to be used by nurses in our communities. OcuSkin Solutions is a company from the community that is looking for WSU connections, and they're developing skin tone matching eye covers for those who have suffered eye trauma. Another that we're working with is Heart3S, and that is a faculty member, Dr. Susan Collins, who trains counselors on harm reduction therapy modalities for treating substance abuse. And one thing that you might think is interesting is that both Heart3S and OcuSkin Solutions are both social purpose corporations. Glenn, why don't you talk about a couple of the companies here as well?
Sure, I'd be glad to. One of our very first companies, in addition to Aperture, who you'll hear from shortly, is Managed Health Connections down there in the lower right-hand corner. Managed Health Connections was started by Sterling McPherson, one of our faculty members who studies substance use disorder. This particular company has had several small business grants at the phase 2 or $1 million level, and their technology is designed to help providers make better decisions to improve patient and user outcomes. So Sterling McPherson, Kim Johnson, and Managed Health Connections is one of our earlier SP3 Northwest companies. One of our more recent ones is one that I have to say I'm president of. It's Matrix Diagnostics Biosystems. It started with one of my former students, plus in Ohio, plus one of our faculty members here at the Health Sciences Health Sciences campus, Dr. Wei-Min Lee. And MXDX Bio is a bioprinting multi-organoid device company to make high throughput screening devices to better identify active compounds that have low off-target effects. Now, I'm going to hand it back to Michelle to talk more about our next slide.
Thanks so much, Glenn. So one of the ways that we help our companies, as I mentioned, is connecting them with service providers. And we have a number of service providers on our website and that we know in order to help grow businesses. One of those that I'm going to give a big shout out to here is Perkins Coie, the sponsor of today's Wake Up with Research. As you can see, within our directory, we have accounting and finance service providers, economic development agencies like the University District, executive advisors, funders, insurance, and as Daryl would say, the list goes on. I've included some of the logos, but certainly not all of the logos of the companies that we interact with to help companies move forward with taking their innovation and their novel research and making it applicable for the region, the states, and hopefully the world. Next slide. The other way we help connect them is through a really strong mentor network of people who have been there, done that, and also advise on specific parts of how to build a company and what to do next, how to strategically place themselves to help the most people that they can with the innovation that they're developing, and how to do good while building good companies. Next slide. You may have noticed some of the media coverage over the past 4 or 5 months that have come out. We've been highlighted in the Puget Sound Business Journal, the Spokesman Review, Spokane Public Radio, and a few other places as well. Of course, none of this would be possible without our generous founding donor, Bank of America. Next slide. And I would be remiss to not invite you all to Funders, Founders, and Friends Mixer on April 20th. This is going to be what networking looks like for the virtual world, and we're hoping to go hybrid as things open up. You can register through the SP3 Northwest website, and if you are interested in giving a lightning talk, please email me. We're going to have 4 to 6 3-minute lightning talks from those people that are attending. Glenn, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I'm going to introduce really very quickly the faculty and student entrepreneurs, as I say, from A to Z, from Aperture to Zephyr, who are going to talk about what I would put in kind of looks like a scrambled order, present, past, and future, but there's a reason for it. The present, we're going to have Georgina Lynch from Aperture Biotechnologies, who is a founding member of SP3 Northwest. This is identifying a WSU embraced entrepreneurship activity in the present. Then I'm going to have Joe Harding. I've asked Joe Harding from formerly M3 Biotech, now Athera Pharma, to talk about his experiences from the past as well as the present, because before SP3 Northwest existed, entrepreneurship was resisted, not extolled and supported. So that's a story for the past, and we don't want to see that repeated. We want to see it moved on from. And that's the future. The future is student startups, and we're going to have Sarah Schroeder from Zephyr Sleep Systems talk about her and her team's system for helping mobility impaired patients sleep better and move in bed. She's a passionate student entrepreneur, and it's my vision, it's my opinion as well, that student entrepreneurs will truly be the important SP3 Northwest creators and innovators that will have an regional impact for all of us in the future, and we embrace them wholeheartedly. So with that, I'm going to ask Kevin to go to the last slide. Please check out our website, sp3northwest.org. You'll see more of the information on each of the companies, each of the service providers, each of the mentors that we talked about briefly in this presentation. And now I'll turn it back to Celestina, I believe, who will introduce Georgina Lynch.
Great, thanks so much, Glenn and Michelle. That was so great hearing all about SP3 Northwest. I think, Michelle, you said it best, where you're helping innovative researchers do good while building good companies. That's great. I'd now like to introduce you all to Dr. Georgina Lynch. She is an assistant professor in speech and hearing sciences in the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine, and she is co-founder and scientific advisor with Aperture Biotechnologies, of which we're now going to hear a little bit more about this morning. Georgina.
Thank you, Celestina. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and it's so exciting to be part of this discussion. I'm very eager to share this morning some of the work that we're doing, and in the context, I'll just set the stage. It's engaging students to translate pupillary screening for autism from lab to clinic, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with the research and then also what we're doing with Aperture Biotechnologies. Next slide, please. To provide a little bit of background so that we all are kind of aware of the context and the challenges that relate to this research, it's probably quite likely that many of you watching this morning have been touched in some way by autism spectrum disorder, whether that's a friend or a family member who maybe has been diagnosed. But it is very common now and has been steadily on the rise over the last 2 decades. It's estimated that 1 in 54 children have autism spectrum disorder in the United States. And there's a significant socioeconomic impact to this. It's estimated $126 billion annually are spent over the lifetime for children who later become adults with autism, whether that's with or without intellectual disability. And that's an important point because we know that that outcome can be very different if they're identified earlier. And those long-term life outcomes change significantly when they get access to intensive intervention that focuses on neurodevelopment from a very early age. So although the diagnosis relies heavily on behavioral testing, which can be subjective, it's really our healthcare providers and our pediatricians who are making those first-line screening decisions about when to go forward with an evaluation. And any parent will tell you the evaluation process is very arduous, and getting to that stage is very difficult. We need more objective tools to help us navigate that more confidently. So despite the fact that we can observe characteristics as early as 12 months, and despite the fact that we screen at 18 and 24 months for behavioral observation and risk for this, we actually see that the average age of diagnosis in the United States is 48 months. And that is really considered late because most children, our hope is to get intervention to them prior to the age of 5. And that window closes in terms of the opportunity to address what those needs are. Additionally, medical conditions are often left untreated in this population and attributed to behavior if we don't identify this sooner so that we understand the impact over development. So in the autism research community, there's really a push to identify biomarkers to support early identification. And here at WSU, we established the Pupil Biomarker ASD Screening Research Program, which is all-encompassing. It has quite a large team associated with it, and it's growing every day in terms of its reach. In the lower right, you'll see an image that shows a pupil, and what that is representing is its technology that we can capture that pupil response. And people ask, well, why pupillometry? Why are we looking at that? And what that pupil reflex tells us is it tells us about the integrity of the brain function. And we can see this in adults if there's been concussion or stroke or some other form of head injury. And it can tell us whether the brain is functioning efficiently as it should. We've extended this concept to tracking neurodevelopment because we know that that pupillary light reflex is intact and pretty efficient from a very young age. So what you see there is a graph that demonstrates what that reflex should look like when it's healthy and when it's functioning correctly. And we are beginning to take those markers and track them in children with autism. We find that those dips that you see on that screen there, they're delayed and they're atypical. And we also are beginning to see that the reverse is true. In the very youngest children with autism, we're seeing acceleration. And so it's telling us that there are age effects and patterns that we can look for. That's the basis of this work. Next slide. So when I think about our message as a land-grant institution, and I really think about ripples on the water as it relates to this research program. And what I mean by that is it really embraces a lot of faculty expertise perspective, student contributions, and then very much engagement with our clinical partners in our community. So first, I'd like to just acknowledge Dr. Steve James, Dr. Mark Van Dam. They were involved in the early development of this work when we first started using eye tracking to explore the concept and see if we could see some change. And the three of us have co-authored a paper on that topic. We have since transitioned to handheld technology. The current research team is on the left, and that includes myself, Dr. Sterling McPherson, who you heard about a little bit earlier. He is an associate professor and assistant dean of research and director of biostatistics and clinical trial design. We were so excited to have him part of this project because he has extensive experience with clinical trials and the statistics that's needed for predictive modeling around this topic. And then we're equally delighted to have medical students. And Lars Neuenschwander, who is a graduate of the bioengineering program, is part of this team, and he provides some of the technical expertise behind the scenes. And Olivia Vargas, who is a second-year medical student with the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine, and she provides a lot of the outreach to our clinical sites. Here you can see Northwest Autism Center and Seattle Children's Autism Center. Those are our clinical partners currently that we're working with. Northwest Autism Center is located here in Spokane. It provides direct services and outreach to families and parent education, and it has a far reach across the state. We are so excited that both organizations are working with us for this work. Washington Research Foundation is funding the clinical data collection that we are gathering out of the lab that is going to inform the development of the biometrics that we're using. Next slide. So students really are the foundation of the work in this lab. And I would just like to give a brief shout out to the students who really have provided a lot of the behavioral and clinical testing that is needed in order for us to do this research. We have students from the Department of Speech and Hearing Sciences. They're graduate level clinician students at our Health Sciences campus, and they've conducted over 300 hours of clinical testing. So although it takes 4 minutes max to record a pupillary reflex, it takes hours to conduct the behavioral testing that needs to be done. So Russell Hislop, Teresa Willard, Kimberly Ronkowitz, they all have now gone on to become speech pathologists. Mingye Shea, she's published on the topic and is now working as a speech pathologist with children with autism. Shannon Carruthers, also 2 years in our lab and has worked with visual tracking and autism. So I'd like to focus on the work that we're doing with Lars Neuenschwander, who has been in the lab now for 2 years. Next slide. Lars and I co-founded Aperture Biotechnologies in 2019. Our goal is to create a tool that will reduce subjectivity, provide these precise metrics for PLR recording, and incorporate hardware with software that can help healthcare providers identify that risk sooner. The ultimate goal is integrating this with other developmental markers. And those developmental markers are things like head circumference, height, weight, eventually genetic markers that also can contribute to this. So what you see is you see the handheld tool, you see an image that shows how we measure that pupil response. And then on the left, you'll see that red line there represents the different aspects of that pupillary reflex that we're measuring. It takes a lot of work behind the scenes to statistically calculate how these things look different by age and by diagnostic category. On the lower left, where the blue lines are, each blue mark on that line represents a child with autism. And our goal is to get that sensitivity up above that line in the center of the figure. What that is the sensitive nature of the tool. We have it at 74%, and our goal is to get it as high as we possibly can. That takes a lot of testing and a lot of kids, which is why we're doing this work now. Next slide. So as we transfer the science to benefit society and we take this work from the lab and we bring it into the development of a product, our goal is to really integrate that research in a way that's going to improve lives for kids with autism and help those healthcare providers. Aperture Biotechnologies was established for that purpose. We've gathered a lot of traction and recognition, both through tech product outlets, as well as advocacy groups for autism across the country. We are at the early stage startup, so we did file provisional patents in 2019 and 2020. We've conducted feasibility testing that have allowed pediatricians to provide input. We've received positive feedback from them that tells us this technology would make a difference in their practice. We've received seed grants from the Jones Milestone Accelerator Program and Greater Spokane Incorporated, which has provided the legal support to help us establish the company. Last year, we incorporated and became affiliated with SP3 Northwest. So as we move to market, there are a lot of steps that need to happen. The FDA process is part of that, expanding our board and seeking that SBIR funding. Our hope is by 2023 that will be able to work with COE providers across the state. And those providers are recognized by Medicaid as Centers of Excellence for Diagnosis of Autism. And we feel that that's a good place to start putting our tool into practice, given the number of children that they see. If you'd like to learn more about Aperture Biotech, feel free to check out our website, and I'll turn it back over to Celestina.
Thank you so much, Georgina, for that fantastic presentation about a new screening tool to help diagnose autism spectrum disorder. What a great contribution to all of the families out across the nation, across the world. Thank you so much for that. I'm now, for questions, let me make that plug really quick. If any of our viewers this morning have questions for Georgina, for any of our speakers, please go ahead and put those questions in the chat function there, and we'll be sure to ask your questions and get some answers at the end of these presentations. So I'm now going to introduce Dr. Joe Harding. Joe is a professor with integrative physiology and neuroscience at Washington State University on our Pullman campus, and he is also co-founder of Athira Pharma. Joe.
Celestina, thank you very much for the introduction. I want to talk about a few things today. I've been at this for a while, and I want to talk a little about generally moving research from the laboratory out into the public. I want to talk about several companies that myself and my best friend and collaborator, Dr. Jay Wright, have founded. And then I want to focus on the technology that's been driven by these companies, that drives these companies. And finally, I'll talk about the most mature of these companies, Athira Pharma, which is based in Seattle right now. So as you can see, I am a professor at WSU at the College of Veterinary Medicine. My training is as a chemist. And what I'm really interested in, and what Jay and I have both been interested from the get-go, is finding ways to take our research and actually bring it to people. It's kind of, we have this maybe unusual, maybe not typical feeling, but we feel it's almost our moral obligation to take our research to people. So we've been working in the translational medicine field for over 30 or 40 years together. We have many patents, both US and foreign, and these are necessary. Anybody who even thinks about moving their technology to the public needs to realize without patent protection, you have no value, you can't raise funds, you can't actually move that technology into the public sector. So we've been fortunate to form 3 companies. The first of these, Pacific Northwest Biotechnology, was a company focused on cancer therapeutics. It actually still exists. And although it probably will be terminating here soon with make a heavy profit. The second is M3 Biotechnology, which eventually became Athira. This is a very active company I'll talk more about a little bit later. It's a company that's completely run by students, ex-students from our laboratory. The CEO of the company, Lean Kawas, was a PhD in my lab. Kevin Church is the director, is the vice president for research and development. He also came from my lab. The director of animal research, Jewel Lavallee, also came from my lab. So it's basically incestuous here. It's completely run by my ex-students. The last company is called Chimeric Designs. It's a new company. It has some innovative technology that directs cancer drugs only to cancer cells. Next slide, please. So, before you even think about starting a company, the first thing that any researcher needs to do is to actually actively consider the amount of time you want to put into this. My wife can attest to the fact that when I started these companies, I was working 100 hours a week combined with academic pursuits and company pursuits. Depending upon how you fall on the spectrum in terms of how much time you want to put into this, there are 3 ways you can get your technology to people. The simplest is what's called a service center. This is something that is done internally at the university. Typically, you find service centers for things like diagnostic tools. Another way you can move it is, if you don't want to be heavily involved, is quick licensing. That is, the university or the commercialization will license it out immediately to some pharmaceutical company or some other vendor who would be interested in your technology. And the last and the most energy requiring and time required, of course, is to start a stable company. Well, Jay and I chose that route there. This picture down in the right-hand corner, this is Jay and I sitting around our typical table in the CUB, the Compton Union Building at WSU. And this is an iconic picture because Jay is writing my ideas, my insane ideas, on a piece of napkin here. And as I was telling Celestina earlier, he has a whole drawer of these things that he saved. Most of them should be going in the garbage, but a few of them worked out. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay, so if you decide, okay, you want to develop a company, there's a few things you need to do. First thing you need to do is find out what university resources are available. As Glenn mentioned earlier, when we first started out, there were no university resources. There was nothing whatsoever. In fact, state law prevented university faculty from starting companies. It was only after Christine Gregoire became our governor that those capabilities, that option became available. We now do have a very strong Office of Commercialization at WSU. They're fantastic, but they do a limited number of things. And SP3 Northwest actually is filling in all those gaps that the Office of Commercialization it's not their calling, it's not the things they do. And with those two organizations together, I think WSU faculty are in a good position to actually move companies forward now. Things that you need to do that are really critical are finding the right people to help you and funding. As Glenn could point out, SP3 Northwest can actually help you with both of those things. When we started out, we had to do it on our own. And that took a lot of time, many mistakes along the way. And if you can avoid those mistakes, you can save time. So the three companies, again, that we started, each have moved technology into the private sector in a different way. Pacific Northwest Biotech, its technology has been licensed, okay? Athera is a stable NASDAQ-traded company that is developing technology focused around neurodegenerative disease at the present, but some other clinical indications in the future. The newest of these is Chimeric Designs, which is a company that develops specific drugs to take chemotherapeutics and have them only interact with cancer cells. It is likely going to be acquired, at least that's the hope. Next slide, please. So what is our technology? We work on growth factors. These are kind of executive proteins that control everything. You can look at the functions there and you can see almost anything that's important that happens in the body is controlled by growth factors. These have been very difficult to develop drugs against. We've developed some technology that does that. Next slide. So if you can impact growth factor function, what type of diseases you impact? Well, most of you, or many of you may know that cancer cells are typically characterized by overactivation of growth. In each cancer cell line, each cancer type that you know of, there's at least one growth factor that's overactive. So if you can make antagonists, that is blockers of those growth factors, you can have a positive effect on that disease. Degenerative diseases, including neurodegenerative diseases, are the exact opposite. Here, typically things are dying when you don't want them to die. So here what you want to do is augment growth factor function. And many other diseases fall into either one of those categories. Next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about Athera Pharma. So Athera, as I mentioned, is a NASDAQ company. It went public in September of last year. It's growing very rapidly. We just moved into a 20,000 square foot facility in Bothell. I don't know if we have 100 employees yet, but we will very soon if we don't. The first compound to the clinic is something called ATH-1017. This is a truly unique drug. This is a regenerative drug. It's not just made to stop neurodegenerative disease, but actually repair damage, to bring back function that's been lost. It's well on its way because it's pretty far along in the clinical trials process. It's already had one completed clinical trial that had promising results in Alzheimer's patients, and there are two Alzheimer's patient-containing trials that are running right now. One of these is called a registration trial, which means if the data is as good as the previous trial, this drug will be available for sale within the next couple years. And we also have a new trial that will be starting here on Parkinson's disease in the next several months. That's a quick overview of what Athira is doing right now, but the company is super active in many areas. This is just a thumbnail description of what's happening. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. And if you have questions, feel free to email me directly, or the Athira website is available. Just look it up online and you can find out what's happening there as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. That was a fantastic overview of all of the great work that you're doing. I'm sure we don't know a family that hasn't been impacted by cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and related dementia. So your work just has far-reaching impact. I loved what you said, Joe, about you and Jay having a moral obligation to take our research to people. That is such a commitment to the land grant mission. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. For those of you that have questions for Joe, like he said, you can reach out to him or look at the company. You can also put a question in the chat function or the Q&A function there, and we can be sure to ask Joe at the end of this presentation. So our final guest today is Sarah Schroeder. We're excited to have Sarah to join us. Not only is she a recent bioengineering graduate of WSU, but she is also one of the co-founders and CEO of Zephyr Sleep. Sarah.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm very excited to share with you guys today what we've been doing over at Zephyr Sleep. So today the talk is going to be mostly about the technology and what we've done so far as a company. So speaking on creating a pressure-sensitive smart bed to help mobility impaired patients. So to start, we'll go over our team a little bit. So as Celestina mentioned, I'm Sarah Schroeder. I'm the CEO of the company. I'm one of the co-founders of Zephyr Sleep. I'm joined on my team by Katie Lober and Jackson Reeb are my other two co-founders. We all graduated together in 2020 from the bioengineering program over at WSU. And this was our senior capstone project that we have since turned into a company. This past year, we brought on our first intern. So Svetlov helps us with our computer science side and the user interface, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then down below, we have an advisory board and our mentors that have been instrumental in helping us really get past that just very beginning stage and students into really getting into the nitty-gritty of the company. All right, so to get to why. So at Zephyr Sleep, we found that there are two problems that are not currently being addressed well. The first is that 46 million people in the US suffer from some form of mobility impairment. And specifically for us, we're looking at ALS patients, but this number also includes severe arthritis and Duchenne and Becker's muscular dystrophy, or truly any form of mobility impairment you can think of. And we've heard time and time again from these patients quotes like the ones below, that every night it's a struggle to fall asleep. Getting a good night's sleep is critical for extending your life. These are emails we've received from ALS patients that have found us through our various avenues. And we found this to be true in all of our interviews, that patients cannot get restful sleep because they feel trapped in their beds because they can't shift themselves due to that lack of muscle control associated with their immobility. And then secondly, nurses moving patients accounts for 1/4 of all hospital worker injuries. This is super costly to hospitals and care facilities. It costs about $2 billion a year in just injuries alone. Currently, the method to turn patients in a hospital is like you see in this video over here. It's multiple nurses really straining with a bed sheet to just tug and pull that patient over, which can be both physically strenuous on the nurses, but also just emotionally harmful on the patients as well. So these two problems we realized we could address with one solution, and that is our Zephyr sleep system. So this is what we built as engineers. It includes 3 parts, starting with the mattress, which is probably the most innovative part of this. It's a bed of pressure-sensitive oscillating air cells that are both reactive to touch stimulus. So if you push down on it, it'll inflate in kind. And it can also be controlled with pre-programmed and pre-programmed situations that you can use the touchscreen user interface to select one or multiple cells to inflate or deflate together to get the cells exactly the way that you need them. So that's one, and the user interface. And then the final aspect is the bed frame itself, which is in our typical hospital model, looks like a hospital bed frame, excuse me. It has support bars on the sides to really assist in the turn as well. And it also hinges at the knees and the waist to get the user into a seated position. So diving into a pre-programmed setting here, we have the role assist technology, which is the most novel pre-programmed setting that we have and the one that we're most excited about. So as you can see, role assist can be used for the patient to initiate a turn on their own, and then a nurse or caregiver can just help facilitate that turn if needed and in a care facility rather than a home setting. So it works by having one side of the air cells inflate all together. The middle column will deflate a little bit to get the patient's shoulder into that little valley. And then the air column on the following side will inflate to catch that shoulder as the turn is facilitated all the way over. So with this technology, we envision patients in the home setting to be able to complete a turn on their own, and then patients in a clinical setting to be able to facilitate the turn on their own, just with the nurse there to provide additional safety. So just to go through the traction that we've made so far as a company since we were students and on to today. Last June, we were finalists in the UW HIC, and then we got second place at the Northwest Entrepreneur Competition. And that was really when we decided that maybe this is a viable technology, maybe this is a good idea for a company. It seems like people are interested. It seems like this could have a lasting impact on people's lives. And I believe that that was when all the founders came together and just signed a little contract. I believe it might have actually been on a napkin and decided that we're going to go forward with this. So June of last year was a big month for us. We also won first place at the Life Science Innovation Northwest competition and decided to move forward once again. And we're accepted into the Jones Milestone Accelerator, which was, again, like another big step for us. Then in July, we incorporated Zephyr Sleep Inc. and we filed our provisional patent. And then we also participated in UW I-Corps, which was a super great program that we're still reaping the benefits of. Highly recommend for anyone interested in starting a startup out of the student portion of the school. It's super useful in really getting your customer interviews in and making sure that your discovery is targeted to the right audience. So what was kind of novel about our approach is that we did our interviews with our patients before we had any idea what the technology was going to be. We wanted to build something to address a problem rather than build something and then try and find a problem that it could address. So it was definitely, we went into an also ALS support group meeting with no biases. We had no idea what we needed to build to help them. We went in open-minded and asked them, what are your daily pains and gains? What can we build something to address? And from there, we found the problem was sleep, and then we built the mattress and bed frame and all of that sleep system to address that. Back to the timeline. In September, we were accepted into SP3 Northwest. In October, we did some more customer outreach and discovery. We started releasing a newsletter, which if you scan the little QR code there, will take you to our website, and then you can sign up for the newsletter if you're interested in keeping up with us. in November, as I mentioned, we hired a software developer or intern. We now have our quarter scale prototype, as you saw in the video. We're looking to have our half scale demo size prototype, which would be the size of like a twin size bed that we can use for testing, firstly on able-bodied patients and then moving on to mobility impaired patients. In the next 2 months, we're going to have that size completed. So that's exciting. Looking forward to that. And we won a WSU Global Entrepreneurship Competition back in November. Now, starting in 2021, in February, we are preparing for an SBIR grant. We're looking at an NSF one. And we also went back to UW HIC to compete again, which was just as informative as it was the first time. So yeah, at the bottom here, you can see right now we're looking to complete our full-scale prototype, as I mentioned, so we can get some of that testing done. And then we're moving into art partnerships with the Gleason Institute of Neuroscience. We're gonna have our prototype in their ALS mobility impaired showroom. So it's gonna be a very cool place where patients and their families can go and see these assisting technologies in person. They can touch it, they can look at it, they can interact with the technology before they bring it into their home. So we plan to get some pre-orders from that as well. And as I mentioned, we're coming up on that 1 year mark on our patent. So we're gonna start moving into that as well. And I think that's all I have for you guys today. If you have any questions, put them in the chat or feel free to reach out to us on our website.
Thank you so much, Sarah. What a great presentation. I love hearing about a student-started company. We look forward to seeing all what you and your company and co-founders produce in the future. And it sounds like what I'm learning this morning is that napkins are key to starting businesses. So one little tip for the rest of us here. We're now going to move into the Q&A portion of Wake Up with Research. So I have a question for our three company leaders here that we highlighted. So Joe, Georgina, and Sarah, this question is for you, and we'll go in that order so that you can be prepared. Specific to your research, what gives you hope? Joe.
Well, I think the human mind is very innovative. And I think where you see problems, and if you understand some basic science, typically there's some interface there that you can find. So in terms of what we're doing right now, as I mentioned, we already have some very exciting data. I didn't really go into in detail at Athera that looks incredibly promising. If it continues, hopefully we'll have a drug that actually changes millions of lives within the next couple of years. So as you pointed out afterwards, everyone is affected by neurodegenerative disease or cancer or whatever. It's all personal. So that's, I believe in human innovation. I do. And if you have a reason for doing it, then I think you can have a hopeful outcome.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. Georgina.
This is something that has followed my passion for the last 20 years in treating children with autism and their families. And my hope is that the work that we're doing will help reduce the number of stories that I hear from families about how difficult it was to figure out what was going on with their child, and that they're able to get those services earlier. And it makes a difference for the whole family, not just for the child. This battle with trying to figure out what's going on, and the feelings of guilt, and the strain on the relationships in the process of understanding what's happening with your child, I think that we can impact a change that will really move the needle a little bit in that regard. I hear too often when I meet with parents, they'll come in, and I've had one parent lay out literally 40 different reports of different specialists with different opinions of whether their child had autism or not. And she said, in this day and age, why do we still not have something that's a little more concrete? So my hope is that in my lifetime, we will see that change happen.
Great. Thank you so much, Georgina. We had a question come in while I have you here. A question come in about your purpose statement. Do you have that handy that you can share with our viewers?
Yes, for Aperture Biotechnologies, our purpose, we are a data health analytics company that hopes to impact change for neurodevelopmental health for all of the people living in Washington State and beyond.
Great, thank you so much. Sarah, what about your research gives you hope?
Yeah, I would say for us over at Zephyr Sleep, what gives us hope is hearing the stories of ALS patients and their families and their caregivers, and hearing how our technology would impact their lives. We've had some really inspiring meetings, I think, just really proving that our technology would fill this niche where other companies haven't necessarily thought to provide for this group. And the idea that caregivers for ALS patients will say that they have a full-time second job caring for their loved one. And so that was maybe a surprising thing that we heard, is that this technology, while obviously would impact the lives of the patient as well, would maybe almost impact the lives of the caregiver even more. So the hope that they give to us for this technology to really help their lives, really transform the amount of time and effort they have to put into just existing is very inspiring, and that keeps us going.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. Yes, the focus on caregivers is clear across all of the presentations today. Thank you for bringing that up. We have time for one more question, and I see other questions coming in the chat here, and we'll make sure to connect you with a researcher so that all questions can be answered, even if it's after our Wake Up with Research this morning. This last question is for Glenn and Michelle. So Glenn and Michelle, how can we as community partners and life sciences stakeholders better support your efforts? Glenn.
Well, mentoring the young students, mentoring the faculty who are trying to find time in their 80-hour, 100-hour week to do one more thing and to make a difference is critical. Management expertise for companies is something that we're short of here. Funding for companies to get through what we call the valley of death. You have the idea, you get started, and then you need money to get going. You need a bridge fund to bridge from you starting the company to getting that first small business grant. There's 9 months there where you got nothing except what you can write checks for. And that's where we need gap funding. We need management expertise to help these companies develop a proper business model and fund that business model in real time.
I would add to that, I love Glenn's comments, but I would also add that we need more networking. I know that COVID has made it really challenging, but those organic conversations between people who have maybe tangential interests really spur more innovation, and it becomes a very virtuous loop. So give out another shameless plug for our Founders, Funders, and Friends that's coming up April 20th.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for all of our panelists this morning. We're coming up at the end here of our third Wake Up with Research. I want to thank all of the viewers this morning for joining us. We also want to thank our wonderful panelists. We had Glenn Prestwich and Michelle Armstrong with SP3 Northwest, Georgina Lynch with Aperture, Joe Harding with Athera Pharma, and Sarah Schroeder with Zephyr Sleep. So thank you. We truly appreciate all that you're doing for all of the residents of the state of Washington, for all of your insight and innovative research. I also want to let you know that this is our last Wake Up with Research for this spring semester here. We are going to take a little pause here after we've done our first 3 Wake Up with Research so that we can focus now on graduating our healthcare professionals and launch them into their careers here. We'll take a break over the summer as we start to prepare for our fall series, Wake Up with Research. So please stay tuned over the summer. We'll be sending out advertisements for our September Wake Up with Research, and we will have a fantastic researcher, Dr. Julie Postma from the College of Nursing, talk about the link between wildfire smoke and health. So thank you all for joining us. I want to give another shout out to our fantastic sponsor, Perkins Coie. We truly appreciate your support. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and go Cougs.